today I'm going to be talking a little bit about my own journey, particularly in music and medicine, but also invite you to reflect on your own journeys in the arts. Because really, we are all learners. And so our objective today is to identify ways that music can be incorporated into your own work, into your life, and the life of your patients, and into the community. And these, you'll see, are intersecting objectives, and we can never really separate the role of arts and humanities from the rest of our lives. So the major challenge that we're having in our communities, particularly, it was starting before the COVID pandemic, and then it was accelerated and amplified during the pandemic, was an increase in loneliness and anxiety and isolation, not only of the individual patient, but also of the medical student, the medical resident, our neighbors, our friends. But with that came a decrease in resilience, a decrease in the use of our hands, manual dexterity, and a decrease in curiosity and creativity. So I argue that with the arts, we can help address those changes. With the arts, embracing the arts increases our ability to be curious, to be creative, to work with other people. I started my journey in Honolulu, Hawaii. I was born there. I was in a family of 5 kids. My parents were not particularly well off, but my father on the GI Bill went to law school and became the first Chinese American federal judge in the country. He and my mother were dedicated to education of the 5 rowdy children, and one of the things that we all did was we all started the piano. My sister had piano lessons, and I, being the little sister, would jump up on the piano bench and play everything that she had just played when the piano teacher left. So it took them several years to realize that I was just copying my sister, and I couldn't read music until I was 8, but I started playing the piano when I was 4. My father, being very wise, also said, when you're 8, you are allowed to start another instrument. Rather than you have to start another instrument, he said, choose an instrument because you're good enough on the piano now to move forward. So we really had 10 musical instruments going all the time. And my mother, rather than making us practice, would ask us to stop practicing, because there were a lot of notes going around in the house. But the school that I went to was a school called Punahou School. It was a private school, K through 12, and the gift that I got from them was academics were assumed. Music and the arts were something that everybody did. Everyone chose an art form. And the third part of the stool was, because we had been given these gifts, we were taught that it was our obligation to give them back. I learned very early on about community service, and this very heady combination of these art forms and academics and giving back resulted in people like Steve Case, who started AOL, and a senator, then President Barack Obama, and he was a singer, and so that was a really great base. And the thing that happened to me as a high school student was I would bring my music to the local Shriners Hospital every week. It was the Shriners Hospital for children with congenital disabilities, and they would come from all over the Pacific to have surgery, to have their congenital foot deformities fixed so they could walk on the beach and be part of the society. But they would only be shipped there by themselves and without parents, because the parents were taking care of their extended families. And we would come with our instruments and play for them and ask them to play. And by the time I finished high school, I saw that magical change in the light in their eyes and the laughter of the children when they were playing their own instruments. So by the time I got to Harvard, I was dedicated to either being a pediatrician who played music, a music therapist, or a music educator. I went on to NYU Medical School and found my tribe. There were other musicians in medicine there. We put together an orchestra, we put on a musical, but there were also people in summer stock, directors, lighting people, and these are all my classmates in medical school. So we did not abandon the arts during that time. It wasn't a formal program. And then I came home to Boston, to Mass General, because by then Boston was my home. and we continued our music there. What I discovered and what I continue to lead now is that the assumption is that music heals. And I think that's something that we all understand and everybody in our community understands, but there are many ways to get to that through music education, researching music. Our colleagues who are studying the neuroscience of music have broken open new ways of understanding why music is so healing. Music medicine for people like me who are doctors and play music, and the music therapists, where it's a specific profession. They train in psychology, they train in improvisation, they train in different modes of using music, and then apply those to patients the way that we choose certain medications for certain illnesses for our patients. They will also choose different musical modalities. And my musical home from 1984 was and still is, the Longwood Symphony Orchestra. This is an orchestra of medical professionals named Longwood Symphony Orchestra for the Longwood medical area at Harvard Medical School. It's a lovely place. We really strive to play music at the very, very highest level because that's what type A people do. and we were trained to do that, but we also have lots of conversations during breaks. One of our trumpet players came as a German medical student, and he's now the head of the HST program at Harvard Medical School, is because his stand partner, Len Zahn, was a cell biologist, a stem cell biologist, and so Wolfram would always look over and see what Wolfram was reading during the rests, and they started sharing articles and they started doing research together. So these are the academic affiliations of our orchestra, and the hospital affiliations of our orchestra. So I would say that of the 80 people there, this is probably the only institution in Boston that brings all of these people together in harmony once a week. But as I said, there's 3 parts to the stool, and what we found was we really enjoy playing music with each other. We really enjoy playing at the highest level and just working. Last Saturday we played the Rachmaninoff Second Symphony, which is a giant leap, but we did it. But what's even more important to us is that each of our concerts engages one of our community partners from the Boston area. So we have worked with over 50 nonprofits in the Boston area, not to play a concert and give them all our money, because we found that financially doesn't work, but instead to engage them in asking them what is their objective, what would they like to accomplish by working with us through music, who they can bring into the concert hall with them to tell the message. So does this sound like how you're taking care of a patient? You know, what is your objective? How can I help you get better? And how can you be engaged in your own care? And we found that these nonprofits are basically our nonprofit patients. Dr. Albert Schweitzer, who's sort of my North Star, said, "One thing I know is the only ones among you who will be truly happy are those who have sought and found a way to serve." Schweitzer was himself a philosopher and a theologian, and then at the age of 30 he heard about the healthcare disparities in Gabon, in French Equatorial Africa at that time, and he decided to go into medicine. And so he went to medical school at the age of 30, moved to Gabon at the age of 38, and established the Albert Schweitzer Hospital, which is a little over 100 years old now. But he only came back, interestingly, he left there when he was during the Spanish flu pandemic, and became the doctor for he was brought there, but he was in prison actually, but he was asked to be the village doctor, and so he had no piano or organ there, and so he created one out of paper and practiced during his that time on a paper piano. So this is my reminder to hold space and breathe. I was at the Fenimore yesterday, and just it was so many beautiful things there. But I would like to now just play a little bit of music. It's always hard to talk about music without playing something. And during that time, just think about ways that music enhances well-being for you, and perhaps a personal experience where music touched you or a loved one. arts and the humanities, we know that it does heal our patients when we engage in this practice of balanced care. But we are also healing ourselves and healing our community by setting a different standard and a different culture for the way we care for our patients. I mentioned that I was always curious about the other fields, the music therapy field and the neuroscience of music field, and so this is quite a long time ago now, 15 years ago, the Longwood Symphony started having seminars called Crossing the Corpus Callosum. And we brought together physicians and neuroscientists, musicians, and music therapists to ask them what was their perspective and what could they learn from each other. Since then, this field has really, really blossomed, and we really have a beautiful community across the country and really across the world of people engaging in music as care, but also understanding what music is doing to help people. As you saw when I was playing, we really are using a lot of our brain when we're playing. They used to look for a musical center in the brain and realized they couldn't find it because the brain is so engaged in so many things when you're playing. When you think about it, the auditory nerves, of course, are responding when you hear music when you're playing. Your cerebellum is your rhythm section. The green part that's your deepest part. The limbic system is the emotion that you're hearing when you're playing. The blue and yellow up there is your sensory motor system. And of course, we're using fine motor, we're using gross motor. We're refining things even as a note is coming out of you. You're realizing it's in or out of tune and making adjustments automatically. And this feedback loop, continually using that, is engaging our frontal lobes, of course, for executive function. So the brain is very, very involved, and of course there's also the visual cortex in the back. So we think about this and wonder what are ways that we can use music in healthcare settings. So of course I'm a pediatrician, so of course I think from the very start, like, how did this all happen? For motor development, there's eye-hand coordination, there's motor planning, executive function, body awareness, and they sort of train the dancing out of us when we're classical musicians. But when you see other musicians, the jazz musicians, the rock musicians, they move a lot more than we string players. But there's the fine motor and gross motor development. And when you think about how the Broca's and Wernicke's areas are, the language systems, you're hearing music of the people you're playing around, or you're listening to your own, and then you're expressing your music. So you're using both the Wernicke's and the Broca's area. And for that, our neuroscience friends tell us that the arcuate fasciculus between those is thicker in musicians, and they can identify musicians by looking at their MRIs. Compared to people who haven't played music. And it's not even musicians now. It's like, if you put in the time for a number of years, you already laid those tracks down when you were a child. And you can also pick them back up. But in language and development, we're identifying pitches, discriminating rhythms, recognizing patterns, listening to tonal differences, timbre differences, and then also appreciating the element of surprise and appreciating silence. You can see how when we're listening to a patient or talking to a colleague, all of these nuances, even if we're training it as a musician, we can also translate to care of patients or in discussion with colleagues. And of course, there's a social emotional learning. This is the Conservatory Lab Charter School that I'm deeply involved with. These kids very luckily get music from K through 8 every day. They all play instruments. Most of them are from inner city Boston, and it's a charter public school, so it's free of charge for them. But they're learning modulation of emotions, resilience, persistence, going back and playing that note over and over again to get it right, cooperation, taking turns. You can't come in early on a piece without sticking out, so you have to wait your turn, even if it's many, many notes later. And we can sometimes not tell that to our kids in the classrooms, but they do learn it when they're in their ensembles and playing together and learning to communicate with peers. What I love about this school is their motto is, we are crew, not passengers. We're engaged, we're working together, but we're engaged with each other. So this answers some of the questions. What how can music help address specific medical needs? Parkinson's and dance, music intonation therapy for strokes and traumatic brain injury, where if the left side of the brain speech center is damaged, how can you use the contralateral side? How can you activate that through singing and touch? And the music therapist will work with stroke victims to do that. And actually, one of the people who's a big champion of that is Gabrielle Giffords, the senator who was shot in her speech center. She learned to speak and sing through musical intonation therapy. She was a French horn player beforehand, so she was, her brain was already primed. But music and Alzheimer's how many of you have seen an elder person with Alzheimer's get excited when they hear a song that they remembered from their childhoods? It's very remarkable, it's very moving, and the musical memories are deep. This is my colleague Adrian Anantuan, who was born with one arm, but went on to train at the top conservatories, Yale and Curtis, and he played for the Pope, he played for the Dalai Lama. But his idea is also, he's an educator, and he's also the artistic director of Shelter Music Boston. So he brings his music to the shelters in Boston, and not a one-shot deal playing it and saying, I did a nice thing, but working directly with those clients every month to ask them what their opinions are, what pieces they want to hear, how he can change the music, and also, can you help me write a new song? Asking them for their stories, putting them into poetry, and then putting them into music. I talked about dance for Parkinson's. When Parkinson's patients are dancing or listening to music, they're able to override the initial freezing when they're starting to try and move. And with a music therapist and with the Dance for PD therapists, they start to really be able to walk farther and tolerate more exercise than they had before they started their dance. And just last week at this concert, we also had the Cambridge Common Voices. This is a choir of neurodiverse individuals, and the joy that they sang with was so infectious. The entire audience was rocking out. So how can we apply our knowledge of the arts to our work as clinicians and caregivers and scientists? Which are we talking about here? Are we talking about learning a piece of music, or are we talking about a diagnosis? Evaluating information, breaking down things, recognizing patterns, scaffolding, utilizing reasoned improvisation, expressing your creativity through a set of established rules, and creating a narrative, and then going back and recreating the narrative based on new information. I would say it's both. The creativity that goes through inventing and refining the things that we do in caring for patients, in inventing new technologies, new medications. This all started a long time ago, and not surprisingly, many of the inventions that brought us to where we are in Western medicine now was started then by people who were musician doctors. And it's probably even further back. I was having a conversation with a cellist the other day about shamans, who were musicians who healed through music. And one of the reasons was somebody named René Laennec, who was an accomplished flutist and carved his own flutes out of wood. He also ended up carving his own first stethoscope. And when you think about the shape and the tubing and his understanding of the acoustics that would go through the tubing, then creating the first model of stethoscope is not such a far reach. I understand there's a big connection here with Columbia University. Well, Dr. Virginia Apgar was the first full professor, a woman professor at Columbia, and she was trained as a surgeon and pioneered obstetric anesthesiology. She is the Apgar score, our first 2 grades when we're born, and the founder of the March of Dimes. But she was also a luthier. So not only was she a violinist, but she built her own instruments. And she built a string quartet of instruments. And I understand that if there are 4 musicians at graduation of the Columbia Medical School, they will play those instruments at Carnegie Hall during graduation. Now, this is Dr. Theodore Billroth, who we know as the Billroth 1 and the Billroth 2 anastomoses, and his colleague, Johannes Brahms. Dr. Billroth became the head of the Department of Surgery in University of Vienna, but he himself was an accomplished pianist and then learned the violin and viola. He wanted to be a pianist, but then was shadowing his uncle, who was a surgeon, and decided that he would do that. But during the day, he was inventing new surgeries for cancer, for larynx, stomach, GI cancers, thyroid, as well as experimenting with anesthesia at that time. After he would invent a procedure, he would sit down with his medical students and they would go through sort of M&M rounds. He started a journal club and looking at the articles. But in the evening, what he had done is he wrote to his friend Brahms and said, please move to Vienna because I need to hang out with you. And so Brahms did. And so in the evenings, Brahms would come over to Billroth's house with other composers and musicians, and they would listen to the inventions that Brahms had made. They would take them apart like M&M rounds. They would respond to each other, and they started a musical journal. So you see that Billroth really was doing both. It just depended on the time of day. And he very famously said, it is one of the superficialities of our time to see in science and in art two opposites, because imagination is the mother of both. And it sounds like he would have been one of the Svahn lecturers, or he would have loved meeting Dr. Svahn. And then moving up into our time, Dr. Thomas Sudhoff won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2013. And Lancet asked him, who was your most important influence? And he said, my bassoon teacher, because he taught me to do something right and practice and listen and practice. Basically, he was learning resilience, persistence, and all of those things that we know we need in medical research. And Sudhoff said, the arts prepare a growing child just as well for a scientific and technical career as does STEM training, because the arts train a person in discipline, independent action, thinking, and in the need for attention to detail without becoming a prisoner of that detail. So in my last final minutes, I just wanted to talk about some of the other projects that we've been engaged in. This is my colleague, Dr. Ron Hirschberg. He's a rehabilitation physician at Mass General and Spalding, and in 2020, he was asked to be the medical director for the Boston Hope Hospital. This was the hospital that they established in the Boston Convention Center, 500 beds for patients that were discharged from the acute care from Mass General and the Brigham, and 500 beds for the homeless population that were deeply affected by COVID. And so he was there, and you see what a warm and wonderful hospital this looks like. So he called me and he said, you know, I can do the physical therapy and the respiratory therapy, but this is pretty bleak here, and what they really, really need is we need to engage in music. So we started the Boston Hope Music Project, where we also realized that our musicians in the town, I'm married to a professional violinist, and he teaches at most of the conservatories in Boston, but we knew that our conservatory students were locked in their rooms, and they were used to be playing for audiences and playing in chamber music and playing in orchestras. They couldn't do any of that, and so the isolation was very severe. We engaged them to upload musical doses, 5 minutes of musical doses, asking them to think about, if you were an isolated patient, what would you want to hear? And so, you know, don't play a Bartok symphony or something, but what kind of music would touch the hearts of those patients? And so that changed the way the musicians were thinking, and we then put these musical doses together in playlists and gave it to through tablets, we gave it to the patients to listen to. But an interesting thing was that we realized that not only were our patients listening to these musical doses, but our caregivers were. And the caregivers started saying, I wish I had not given up my viola. I wish I could learn the piano. I've never had time because we couldn't afford it, or I was busy in residence. And so then we started something else called the Boston Hope Music Teaching Project, and engaged initially virtually conservatory master's students who needed to have they had teaching requirements. So they were teaching our frontline workers by Zoom once a week, and our committee would create prompts for them just to help their mental health, and it of course then also helped us. But this is the Ether Dome at Mass General, so this is a celebration when the pandemic rules were being a little bit relaxed. Along those same lines, and very recently, 2 weeks ago, the Global Response Medicine also engaging Dr. Hirschberg. He called me and he said, I just got back from Kyiv, and I went to talk about blast injuries and mental health care for all the patients, the wounded warriors. And we're going to bring a team of doctors from Kyiv to Mass General for 2 weeks where we can share with each other. And so they came, these are psychologists and psychiatrists. Last year they had brought anesthesiologists, and the year before that they brought trauma surgeons. And so we put together a concert so that we could help defray the costs of bringing them to Kyiv and from Kyiv, and engaging Ukrainian musicians who were here, who, again, it was healing to them to be able to play on behalf of this beautiful project. So the square on the bottom left is a Zoom call. So my friend Yo-Yo Ma could not be in Boston at that time, so he Zoomed in from somewhere in Canada, and we had a conversation for about an hour with the clinicians. And the takeaway was just so beautiful. He said, "What keeps you so resilient 3 years in, knowing that there's all of this going on, and knowing that they were going back in 2 days?" And they had just gone to Cranes Beach, which is one of our most beautiful beaches in Boston. And what we hadn't realized is I think all of them had not ever seen a beach. They'd not seen a big body of water like that before. And so they said, well, there's 3 things that keep us going. Number 1 is our friends and family, and we know that they are our supports. Number 2 is no matter how dire, our patients are grateful. And number 3 is holding on to beauty, such as the day at the beach and watching the flowers blooming and watching the birds fly over the ocean. And so then Yo-Yo played a piece called Song of the Birds that Pablo Casals played in protest and so they were playing this together, and so that's a beautiful moment that I will always hold on to. And this work is really moving forward. There's a lot of challenges in funding, of course, in all areas, but because of the new connections and the stronger connections between our worlds in the field, but also across our international connections, the field is growing. So in 2019, the AAMC announced a commitment, a true commitment to the fundamental role of arts and humanities in medical education. This is called the FRAME Initiative, and they said arts and humanities are essential to the human experience, with the benefits to medical education going far beyond joy and pleasure. We know that part makes sense, but they are really committed because integrating arts and humanities throughout medical education and allows trainees and physicians to learn to be better observers, interpreters, and build empathy, communication, teamwork skills, and more. We know this. We're really, really happy that the AAMC is embracing it. There's some new stuff on the horizon. The Arts on Prescription is being able to write a prescription to your patients to go to a cultural, being involved in a cultural or artistic experience, or in taking walks in the forest. And just, I think, next Monday, this is going to pop the Neuro Arts Resource Center. There's a Neuro Arts Blueprint, which is it's a network of us who are in this field. But this is a public website that's going to go up, which has got hundreds of articles on the neuroscience of the arts, as well as narratives about different projects that are going on around the country. So this is really exciting, and stay tuned on that one. And finally, so Vivek Murthy, who was our Surgeon General twice during 2 different administrations, He is a big proponent of how to deal with loneliness and isolation. And he said, within the arts lies a powerful but largely untapped force for healing. The arts and sciences are two sides of the same coin, which is our shared humanity. Our ability to live fulfilling, healthy lives depends on bringing those two forces together.